Now here's basically the starting point between loads. Of course, the first batch you do, everything will be clean. But we clean the pan entirely between each batch. We clean the spatulas and clean off the thermometer so there's not any old sugar in the new batch. I don't know if it'd work just as good to just keep reusing stuff, but this is the way we do it. Now after I've got the pan cleaned and back to its pristine condition, now I add my half cup of water before I take it over to the stove. And then I put in the thermometer because then I can see that it's about a ½ inch above the bottom. Otherwise, if you wait till all the butter and everything's in there, you don't know if you're touching the bottom or just above the bottom. And it needs to be just above where the bottom is. Alright, so I'm going to put it on the stove. I've got 1 cube in there, so there's the 4 cubes. And I turn the burner on to the lowest heat setting there is. And I'm going to melt the butter before I add the other ingredients. That seems to work better. Now we find that if you use the soy lecithin, it doesn't much matter what butter you use. But if you don't have soy lecithin, it's better to have whatever's the best butter you can get in your area. We found Land O'Lakes works pretty good. But if you get a cheap off brand, it seems to separate when you're heating it up. But if you have soy lecithin, it won't separate, and it doesn't matter. So anyway, there's ½ cup of water getting warm now, and 4 cubes of butter. I'm going to let that melt before I add the sugar. Okay, I see the butter's melted now, so I've got the sugar ready to go. And it's 2½ cups. I find it's easiest to weigh it. It's 17 ounces and 1/2, 17.5 ounces. I just zero out my scale, put this container on there at 17.5 ounces. So we dump that in the butter water mixture, and then the teaspoon of salt, and then the teaspoon of the soy lecithin. And now I'll mix this up, and after I get it mixed up, I just let it go until it beeps at the soft crack number on the beeper. And then at that point, we add the next ingredient, which is the vanilla. And it's mixed pretty good, so now just let my spatula drip there and wait till it beeps. Now here you can see it boiling. I use this digital thermometer and I set it to soft crack, so it beeps at soft crack. Or you can use your thermometer here, and you see it says 228, and that's 231, so pretty close. I just set it to the soft crack, and I kind of go about my business. I don't mess with it too much until it beeps, and then when it beeps, then I go to the next step, and from the beeping until 300 degrees I stir it pretty well constant. I figured out how to keep the spatula. Just take these all rubber spatulas are the best, and woodworker's clamp that thing onto the handle like that, and it just drips back down in the goodie and I don't have a mess. That's about 232 degrees, and I don't really stir it, maybe once or twice until it beeps. Alright, so now it's beeping. I'll give it a little stir here. And we've been doing 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Kind of bubble and spew here a little bit. Alright, so now I'm going to stir this fairly regular until we hit 300 degrees, and then I'm going to turn it off and dump about 1 3/4 cup of almonds into the mixture. Okay, now it's at 300 degrees, and so I turned off the heat. I think once it's got to 300 degrees, it's done its chemical change to make crispy toffee. Take the smaller thing out here, stir it up just a little bit so it doesn't get hot on the bottom. Now in the oven I've got almonds already heating up. Now I heat 2 cups of almonds at 225 degrees while this is cooking, so I don't dump them in there cold. I dump them all in except maybe 1/4 of a cup, because when we spread out the toffee on the parchment paper, it'll leave some spaces where there's no almonds, and we'll have those extra almonds to fill in the gaps. Alright, I'll put this Alright, so now I take 2 pieces of parchment. We tried the silicone sheets once, but I don't know, just prefer the parchment. Don't have to clean it. Alright, so I got my gooey here. Trying to distribute the almonds in there as evenly as possible. Divide that up into approximately half each parchment sheet. Now the ideal thing for spreading the parchment is this silicone kind of a hard flat spatula. Get it out to basically the thickness of the almonds. And then we kind of square it up. This makes it easier to cut a little later. And I do this on the wood countertop. It gives me plenty of time. I've done it on the quartz countertop. You can try it on your granite countertop, but those things are a giant heat sink and it cools it a little fast, so you have to work faster. Probably if you do it that way, the best way to do it is not to melt the chocolate directly on the slabs, just melt chocolate later and pour it on a completely cool slab. Because if it goes too fast, you just don't have time. Okay, so now there's a few places here that don't have nuts where it kind of flowed out. That's what I saved those few nuts for. And then coming up is the critical part, because interestingly enough, chocolate is a more complex molecule than you'd think for. I guess it's made up of numerous different fatty acid chains, some of which you don't want. And if you make your chocolate too hot, it'll morph into one of the other fatty acid chains that's real sticky or doesn't get hard and shiny. And so if right now I can test the temperature and it's 236 degrees, and that's really hot. The chocolate you basically don't want over 110 degrees. As soon as you get it over 110, it just gets weird. And your chocolate comes off in your fingers when you hold it and everything. So I've flattened this out. Let's spend a little time squaring the edges up. On here, on this wood countertop, you don't have to be rushed, plenty of time. But like I said, I did it once on the quartz countertop, and whew, boy, you got to move along with that because it's setting up fast. Now I have the chocolate here, the Bada Bing Bada Boom chocolate I get from Chocolat online, and it's wafers. And so I've got it here ready, and so periodically I'll just aim my temperature gauge at this, and I don't start putting that chocolate on there till it's 120. That may be even too hot. I don't know, I want it to melt so I can spread it around. But for sure, between 115 and 120, I'll start putting the chocolate on there. And I think the safest way to do it is to melt the chocolate at 110 degrees in that special chocolate melter. Then your chocolate never does get too hot and get weird on you. And it'll take, on the wood countertop, it'll take 10-15 minutes for it to get down to 110, 115 degrees. You used to put it on right now, but I'm telling you, you don't want to put the chocolate on there when it's that hot. So it's still 210 degrees. Now it gets cooler around the edges first, so when it gets to about 120, I'll put a layer of the wafers around the edge, because that's cooling down pretty quick. I'll get the edges of both of them, and then when the center gets down to about 115, then I'll add the rest in there. Then you just let it set till it gets melted and then smooth it out. And then after the chips have set there for a while, then you can kind of smear them around.
Yeah, that's how Donna does it. I can take that outside. Which place you want it?
And then after you have the chocolate spread, you take some ground up almonds and sprinkle it on the top.
It would be cheap.
Now you can do these more evenly with a knife, but it takes forever. And so when you do it in your food processor, you just process it for a second or less than a second and pulse it a few times. Otherwise you turn it to powder. And after I let it spread around on there, I'll take my spatula and just kind of pack it down so it kind of sticks in the chocolate a little better. And then you take your big chef's knife and score it. Now Donna doesn't score hers, she just breaks it. It makes it a little easier to measure in the serving size containers if all the pieces are approximately the same size. Ah. I used to do this when it was a little warmer, and it's easier to cut when it's a little warmer. But the downside is, if it's still warm, the toffee will kind of flow back together, and it kind of all back in one sheet. So I think all in all, it works a little better to do it after it's a little cooler. And then there's a little almond nut cookie, and there's another little almond nut cookie. And then we take a cookie sheet, I like the thin one, and slide it underneath it like that. And then I'll set these over on the table to cool. Okay, as an illustration, this one here on the left, I heated to only 115 to 120. I put the chocolate on it when it got to less than 120. And you see it has a nice glossy, hard sheen, doesn't come off on the finger. This one right here, you can see it's dull, and I put this one on at about 120 to 125. When that slab of toffee was about 120, a little over, I put it on there. So the 5 degrees difference made the difference between a flat looking chocolate that's a little soft versus the hard glossy chocolate, which is what you want. And I guarantee you if you put that on there while that toffee's 250 degrees or still real hot, then you get really weird chocolate that's really soft and kind of white flaky. Okay, now the toffee is completely cooled. The chocolate's on the one side, and so then what you do is you lay a piece of parchment over it and flat cookie sheet on there, and you flip it over. And all these nuts that fall off, you put those back in the bag to use on future toffee. And then you just peel the sheet off of the back of that one, and then I'll put it on the next one. Flip that over. And now, I'm going to put it together a little bit. The other side is about ready to coat with chocolate. So I have my chocolate over here in the double boiler. And it's a double boiler, has water in there. It's important that you never let any water touch the chocolate or it ruins the chocolate. And so I've been melting this slowly, making sure it doesn't get over about 115 degrees.
Where's your stuff? Oh, you're okay. You're gonna put. You need to get the nuts on right away because this hardens up much faster.